Shalom, everybody. Akiva Gersh here. So excited to be talking Aliyah with Rabbi Dov Lipman today. Rabbi Dov Lipman was elected to the 19th Knesset in January 2013, making him the first American-born member of the Knesset in 30 years. He's the author of 8 books about Judaism and Israel and holds rabbinic ordination from Ner Israel Rabbinical College and a master's in education from Johns Hopkins University. He has been at the forefront of combating religious extremism in Israel and is a leader in efforts to create Jewish unity both in Israel and around the world. Former MK Lipman is invited to speak on behalf of the Jewish state both in Israel and around the world and serves as a political commentator for I-24 News and ILTV. He currently serves as senior manager, community outreach for Honest Reporting. And last but of course not least, Rabbi Lipman made Aliyah from Silver Spring, Maryland in 2004, the same year that I did as well, with his wife Dina and 4 children. Rabbi Lipman, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Akiva. It's great to be with you.
Great, so let's just jump right into it. The big question, probably you've been asked already before for years now by other people when Aliyah comes up in conversation, is why did you make Aliyah? What motivated you specifically to make Aliyah, to make that big change in your life?
First and foremost, many people are surprised to hear that my wife and I were not on a course towards Aliyah forever. This was not, when we got married, we were saying Israel or bust, we're going to get there. It very much was not that way. We were quite settled in the United States. I was building my career in education there. And what happened to bring us to Aliyah, it's actually difficult to define in words. I was teaching at the Berman Hebrew Academy in Rockville, Maryland. And in November 2003, they took the school on a school mission to Israel. A few philanthropists got together, a beautiful idea to connect the students to Israel. And they asked for chaperones to come along. And my wife and I jumped at the opportunity to have about 11 days in Israel. And it was during that trip, we started the trip up north and we worked our way slowly towards Jerusalem. It was brilliant how they did this. And about 5 days into the trip, we were on a bus making its way up the hills towards Yerushalayim. And they had a recording of Naomi Shemer singing Yerushalayim Shel Zahav in the background. And my wife and I are sitting next to each other and tears are pouring down our cheeks. I, of course, played the role of the very proud male. And I said, boy, these allergies are really something. I don't know what's going on. But later on that night, we were at the Tayela, the promenade, looking over the old city. And we looked at each other and we said, what are we doing? Raising our children in America when we have the opportunity to raise them in Medinat Israel, in a Jewish state. So it was a very soul-based pull. It wasn't a thought-out intellectual decision. It wasn't, we always had this dream. We had talked about it here and there, but it was those moments where it was really our neshama just pulling us. I think add to that the fact that it was in 2003, it was in the midst of the second intifada and certainly after some really hard times. But when you're in America and you see that, it's much worse than it is when you're here. We saw a country that was so strong and so resilient and so functional despite everything that was happening. So all of that mixed together, and we made the decision then to really explore the idea of making Aliyah.
That's amazing. I literally, as you're sharing that, I can viscerally feel that feeling of coming here for the first time in my own experience and feeling also that passion and that desire, like, I have to live here. I'm going to live here one day. I literally felt that as we were just sharing. Amazing, thank you. So I know that you made Aliyah with kids. That's like a big thing on people's mind. People think about Aliyah sometimes for years, sometimes just for moments, but often one of the sticking points for people in their own decision-making process around Aliyah is their kids. If they already have kids in different ages, young ones, older ones, especially teenager years, makes it a bit more challenging, let's say. So I know you made Aliyah with kids. Can you share with us a little bit about what that experience was like for you, your children, your family all together?
Absolutely, and you're gonna hear me through the course of our conversation. On the one hand, I am extremely passionate about Aliyah and about everyone trying to get to Israel, but I'm also a big advocate for smart Aliyah. And I don't want to see people fail in their Aliyah, and I don't want to see people hurt their children. in their Aliyah. And as someone who has been educating teenagers, has written books about Judaism for teenagers, I'm very sensitive to this topic. One of the reasons why we jumped right in when we were motivated to make Aliyah, to do so as quickly as possible, was because our oldest son at the time was 6. He was going to be turning 7. And he was very happy in America, where he had Little League Baseball and basketball and soccer and choir and all of these exciting things outside of school. And in his classroom, he was one of the leaders. And the thought of going to Israel and him losing all of that and all of a sudden possibly being at the back of his class was very scary for us. And we felt that at that age, it was basically the borderline for him to succeed in Israel. And once a few years would go by, it wouldn't be fair. So on the one hand, I dissuade people, unless their children are really excited about it and really into it, once they reach 10, 11, 12, I believe you're talking about an area we really have to assess it. But if you're in the range which we were, with our oldest child being 7 and 3 other children below, the children are incredible. Children are resilient. Children get excited. And even though the first day of school, they're the scariest feeling in the world, you send your child knowing that he won't understand one word today. And he comes home from school and you say, how was school today? And he says, I don't have a clue because I didn't understand one word today. And you find out that he was actually in the wrong classroom and didn't even know that they were calling roll call. It's scary, but children are incredible. For my son, who was 7, it was a difficult first year. Definitely took him a solid year to acclimate. Hebrew was not, people tell you the Hebrew will be instantaneous. It wasn't. He eventually certainly got it. For our younger children, 4 years old, 3 years old, the Hebrew was incredible just within a few months. And certainly our youngest, the Zahava, was 7 weeks old. And for her, she's essentially lived her whole life here. I always tell younger people, I speak to college students very often, even high school students. And I do say, if Aliyah is your goal and you want to live in Israel, I definitely recommend going at the youngest age possible. Start your life here before you've even found your spouse, before you have any children, because it's very doable. And thank God we are definitely an example of a success in terms of our children. And again, their ages were very important to that. But if you could come here before you've even started that process and you can acclimate without having to also deal with children, that is definitely the ideal scenario for sure.
Totally hear that. Thank you for that.
And Akiva, let me just say, for those whose children are older, I apologize for jumping in. I do say, try to raise your children and encourage them that when they come to yeshiva or seminary after high school, just settle there and tell them we will come and we will follow you. Meaning it doesn't mean that Aliyah should be off the table forever. It just means in that time period, it might not work, but it definitely should be part of their chinuch, and let them know you're supportive of it, you're proud of them for it, and you will join them at some point as well.
100%. We know so many people, right, who the kids brought the parents on Aliyah. I mean, that happened in my wife's family. She's one of 4 children. She was raised with Israel, Zionism, her entire childhood. But the logistics, the timing and all that, didn't work out during her childhood. And then one of her sisters made Aliyah, and then she made Aliyah, and then eventually everyone made Aliyah. And then, of course, the parents were like, yes, we're doing this. Thank you for bringing us home. It's really interesting for me hearing you talk about your children because, I follow you on Facebook. I see you, and I know you've shared about your oldest son, or I imagine it's your oldest son, and his baseball playing here in Israel. So it prompts the next question for me, regarding children, especially because you made Aliyah with children and they weren't born here and they had their own processes of making Aliyah and acclimating to life in Israel. Was there a moment, for any of your kids, I'm sure we can talk about this for hours, but maybe just share with us if there's one moment, where you knew you made the right decision, like you didn't mess up your kid's life. They're here in Israel and they're so happy to be, and it's working. Is there like one moment you can think about like that?
So the greatest moment, we were sitting around and talking about Aliyah one time. My kids hear me talking about it all the time. It's always a discussion at our Shabbat table with whoever we have. And there was one moment where one of my children said, Abba and Ima, we are so happy that you made Aliyah, because had you not made Aliyah and we were living in America, we don't know that we necessarily would have come. Because America is so comfortable and there's so many benefits on the physical level, but we're so happy that you made that step because now we're Israeli. That's an amazing
That's
moment
amazing.
where they thank you for making Aliyah. And in terms of some surreal moments, one, you mentioned baseball. One of our goals was to try to give our son everything he had in America, in baseball here. And not only do we have Little League Baseball, he ended up, and people should know this who are living in America, he ended up becoming part of the Israel national team. It's not just, oh, I'm playing Little League. And he actually traveled to Europe wearing a blue and white uniform with Israel on his chest. He played in upstate New York at the Hall of Fame, stadium near the Hall of Fame, playing for Israel. So it wasn't only we didn't give up baseball and some of the things you have in America, but he actually was able to put it on a much grander level. And then there's the final step, which was when your child is sworn in into the IDF, and you stand there, and it's so surreal, and that the pride that you feel, and in his case, he was in the Golani unit, and then became a commander, and you look back and you say, oh my goodness, like 2004, we made this decision and we weren't sure, and there were all these unknowns, and I don't want to hide this from anyone. There are struggles and lots of difficulties, and we know that Israel is acquired through struggle, but if it's important enough to you, you get through those struggles, and then to see that moment, and every Olet talks about that moment as their child is sworn in or their child becomes a commander. The pride is not the word. You just realize, wow, we really made the right decision, and you can look back at all the challenges and being far away from family, which is not easy, and all the other difficulties, and just say it was all very, very much worth it.
Amazing, amazing, beautiful. You know, our oldest is only 13, so he's still a few years away from Army service, but having been at a couple ceremonies for my nephews, I know exactly what you're talking about, you know, and all Israeli parents are emotional and proud. But I do feel like there's something for Olim to be at one of those ceremonies. I feel like everyone should be at one of those ceremonies once in their life at least. It's just such a powerful thing. I feel like it's 2,000 years of Jewish history just coming together into this one moment where, as you know, I mean, you talk about this all the time, we're back in our land, we're a nation again, we're people with people in our land, and we have our own army. It's just such an inspiring and an emotional thing. Amazing, thank you. So moving on, you know.
And Akiva, you'll see this as your 13-year-old gets older, you'll see this. He's not going to be analyzing what college he wants to go to and, you know, where is it more fun and where is it this or that. He's going to be analyzing what unit in the army he's going to serve in or how is he going to serve his country. And that's a whole different chinuch. The education of your child is so different because they're making that analysis in terms of how can I contribute to my state, to my people, to my nation. And that means that they've been brought up with a whole other set of values. So you'll see that as your son starts getting towards that age.
100%, 100%. I have to just add before I ask you my next question, you know, when our son was much, much younger, you know, he hears about the army, you know, doesn't know anything about it. Sounds kind of scary. He's like, I'm not going to the army. I'm not going to the army. And my wife and I are like, oh no, you know, like we're Israeli. He's Israeli. He's got to go to the army. How can he not go to the army? And of course, you know, with time and, you know, he's growing up and he's going, you know, to Bnei Akiva and in his schools and his Rebbeim and the whole society here, you know, already a couple of years ago, he's like, you know, definitely, you know, I want to go to the army. And of course, already at 13 years old, and this isn't glorifying war. We know that. We're not glorifying war. We're not glorifying violence or fighting. But it is an amazing thing to see a 13-year-old boy already knowing that in 5 years, he's going to be giving of his time, of himself to his people, to his nation. And he wants to do it, like you just said, in the best way possible. Literally, he's been working out. He's never said this, but I can't help but think he's working out and building up his body's strength in order to get into the best unit possible to help his country in the best way possible. So my next question for you is, you know, another big thing on people's mind when they make Aliyah is work. What am I going to do in Israel? I know when I made Aliyah in 2004, you know, I was just married. I didn't have kids yet, so it was a little bit of a different time period for me in my life, but still, and it's a big deal for people, especially if they already have established their careers, they've invested time in their career in America, and then they have to, you know, come to Israel, and who knows what's going to happen with the work. What would you say about work? What was your experience, you know, with working in Israel? What can you share about that?
It's a really good question, and it might be the most important question, because the last thing we want is people coming here and not finding a livelihood and being stuck with a family that they can't support. And that's why when I talked about smart Aliyah, that's certainly a big part of it, to make sure that you do have things worked out. That's also one of the reasons, again, why coming here younger and going to school here and building up your career here is certainly advantageous. There's no doubt that there are many, many resources that are available. The first step, and I can't talk about Aliyah without mentioning them and thanking them, and that is Nefesh B'Nefesh. I would not have been able to make Aliyah without their assistance. I have to be very clear about that. And they definitely do have people who are there to help find people jobs. There are many, many websites that are available, because I know that I've been in between jobs here and there, looking around to see what's there and to try to find a good employment. I also tell people, you mentioned people who already are in one career, you do have to analyze, are you open to possibly shifting an area of interest? If you're younger, choose a career path where you know there's a job market in Israel. And if you're older, to assess it. I do have friends who are in one line in a profession in America, and they came here and it didn't work out, but they were in a mindset of, we're going to make this work. And they took courses, whether it's a technical writing or other things, and now they have a wonderful parnassah given whatever's available in the Israeli job market. So it's two things. It's definitely having things in place, but also somewhere in your mind, a willingness to explore other avenues in case what you've been working in doesn't work out for you. So, but a plan is important. And whenever I speak in shuls all across the world, and I talk about Aliyah, and people come to me at the Kiddush and they say like they want to do it, this coming summer, I do say to them, just make sure you have things in place, you have a plan worked out, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're stuck. Now, again, that doesn't mean there won't be struggle. Certainly, I mean, we're talking about this time in world history where everyone is certainly struggling. But I feel that if you come to Israel with the passion for this is where we're making our home, not as a trial, not as a 1 year, let's see. A 1 year, let's see, there's going to be so many difficulties, it'll just send you back. But if it's this is what we're doing, here's our initial plan, and if plan A doesn't work, I'm willing to explore plan B. I think that that is the way to succeed. But again, to go in knowing there are going to be those challenges. The Gemara is very clear that Eretz Yisrael is one of the things that's nikna b'yisurin. It comes with challenges. But if your mind is and your eyes are on the final goal, which is succeeding here, you'll get through those challenges, even when it comes to the area of livelihood. And even if it means that you have to run around and do many different things in order to make it work, but you're willing to sacrifice that because you want to live in Eretz Yisrael.
Amazing, amazing. And I think connected to that is a feeling among some people, again, when they're considering Aliyah and they're thinking about and planning for it, is, maybe they live like in a small town somewhere in America or in a small community in a bigger town, but they feel like, this is my community. I make a difference. I show up for Minyan, or I show up at the Federation, or whatever it might be. I feel like they know me, they see me, I'm here, I'm doing something. And sometimes the feeling is like, if I move to Israel, like the Jewish state, there's so many people, there's millions of people, like, that question of, if I make Aliyah, can I still make a difference in my community, in my society, in my nation, the way I might feel I do already in America? What would you say about that?
It's such a good question, because so many of the people who make Aliyah are passionate about things, and they were leaders in their communities, presidents of shuls and schools and federations, like you said, and they come here and you don't really have that infrastructure, number one, and also there's the intimidation factor of being in Israel. Here's where I found that people have actually told me, and I thank God for giving me the opportunity to possibly be an example. I didn't mean to be an example, but it sort of happened in God's incredible way. If you would have asked me when I moved here in 2004, is it possible that 8 years afterwards you'll be elected to the Knesset, I would have told you absolutely crazy. Not only because I had no aspirations for it, but Hebrew-wise, it's not a possibility. I'm coming here to teach in English to students from overseas. Culture-wise, it's not going to happen. And it was events in our hometown of Beit Shemesh, which sort of forced me to go out of my shell a little bit and try to lead on a community level. And then one thing led to another. But I tell everyone, do not be afraid of the Hebrew. I'm a classic example of this. I am the proud graduate of 12 years of Jewish day school education in America. I don't know what happened to Hebrew along the way. I had wonderful schools, and I don't. But Hebrew was not the number one focus for sure. And that was a real fear of mine. And I had to work really hard on it. I'll tell you a little secret. The Knesset gives every single member of Knesset a budget to learn a second language. Most use it for English, some use it for Arabic, and some use it for Russian, and I made history. I was the first sitting member of Knesset to use the budget for Hebrew. And I had a tutor who came in. This guy was fantastic. He worked me really hard. I had homework on a regular basis, and my Hebrew is still not the level of my English, but I'm able to communicate without a fear of making a mistake, and everyone is able to do that. So I would tell people, come with a mindset of, I want to jump in. I want to get into that pool and swim, and it'll be a struggle at first, but make Hebrew as much of a priority as possible, even if you don't need it for your profession and for your livelihood. And don't be afraid of the culture. Yeah, we might be people who raise our hands and say please and excuse me and thank you, and that's not always what everyone's familiar with in whatever setting you're in, but jump in. Get involved in the school, get involved in the city council, get involved in your shul. If you feel there's something lacking in your community, get up and start it. Israel is filled with Olim, English-speaking Olim, who have started the most incredible organizations that are really making a difference on the ground in Israel. So I understand the fear that people have, but I'm pleading with everyone to hear from me that the fear is not unfounded, but it's not insurmountable. If you want to be a leader in Israel as well, you can absolutely do it. You just have to do the Hebrew, is very important, and you have to not be intimidated by the culture. And once you get over those two hurdles, the sky's the limit in terms of what New Olim can accomplish here. And remember, when you're accomplishing here, you're not just accomplishing for some community in Galut, in the diaspora, you're literally building the future of the Jewish people. Every single thing that you do here, it's not just me for my little community, but you know this is the eternal home of the Jewish people. You know this is where our destiny is heading, and therefore you are literally building the entire future for generations to come. And there's nothing more thrilling than that, and there's no greater honor than that.
It's amazing. Such an important message, I think, for people to hear. That's really incredible. My last question has two parts, and I think it really flows naturally from everything you're speaking about right now. So the two questions I want to weave in together are, you made Aliyah in 2004, again, the same summer that I made Aliyah, 16 years in Israel. So my last question, part A, is what keeps you here? I know that you have to give up your American citizenship to be in the Knesset, but you can figure it out. Your family still has American citizenship. If you want to, and like that, you can go back to America, right? And you can continue your life there. So what keeps you here? And part B to that is, we know that there's so many people considering Aliyah right now. It's historical. The numbers from America specifically, obviously, are skyrocketing. So what would you say? What would you want to say to people who are contemplating, thinking about, considering, and maybe already planning their Aliyah journey and process?
The number one, there's a story that sticks out in my mind when you ask that question. My grandmother, who passed away just before the whole Corona crisis started, living in Borough Park in New York, she was a Holocaust survivor. And she lived, thank God, till 95 years old. She was blessed to see great-grandchildren. And she, when I called her up to tell her we're making Aliyah, so this is going back to the beginning of 2004, I was so afraid to make this phone call. I'm telling my grandmother, who's here enjoying the golden years of her life after all she's been through. She was in New York. We were in Maryland. We saw her all the time. She got to know our children. I'm going to tell her we're picking up moving thousands of miles away. I was so afraid to make this call. I had no choice. I had to call her, and I picked up the phone. This is in probably February 2004. And I said, Bubby, I have some news for you. God willing, this summer, Dina, myself, the children, we're making Aliyah, we're moving to Israel. And I prepared for what I somewhat jokingly call the wrath of Bubby. My grandmother was not politically correct. She would say whatever's on her mind. And I was prepared for her to be very legitimately upset that we're moving away. And there was a pause after I shared the news to my grandmother. And then she said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shehechiyanu v'kimanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. And she explained to me that as difficult as it'll be for her to have children, her grandchildren and great-grandchildren so far away, and that will be painful, she said for her to know that after all she's been through and all she experienced, that her grandchildren or great-grandchildren are settling in Israel, she has nothing but thanks to God. And that bracha, that shehechiyanu, keeps me going all the time. Through the struggles, through the difficulties, through the challenges, through longing and missing my family. I have 3 sisters living in the United States. I miss them terribly. We're not able to share all the time at each other's smachot, but that very much keeps me going, because the perspective of someone who lived as a Jew, as a real diaspora Jew, during the difficult times, who understands what Eretz Israel means to the Jewish people. My grandmother had lots of pictures of her great-grandchildren, Baruch Hashem, in her apartment, but the picture of my son in his IDF uniform, that for her stood in the forefront, because for her it's unthinkable that her whole family, almost her whole family, was murdered by the Nazis. And here she is, she has a great-grandson who's a commander in the Israeli army. But that goes one step further. My grandmother found the strength to come to Israel, and she visited me in the Knesset. And she's sitting in my Knesset office, and she says to me, this doesn't make any sense. This was 70 years after her liberation from Auschwitz-Birkenau. And she says, it doesn't make any sense. A Jewish state, Israel, Jewish capital, Yerushalayim, Jewish parliament, Knesset, my grandson as a member, it doesn't make any sense. And she's right. We are blessed to live in the most incredible of times. God is showering us with blessing with all the challenges that are happening in the world, and with all the challenges that every individual person in the world has without a doubt in their personal lives. He's giving us blessings that our great-great-great-grandparents could not have imagined. I often think to myself, what would my great-great-grandparents have given up to breathe the air of Yerushalayim for 5 minutes? And here we are, it's here right in front of us. So the question that everybody has to ask themselves, and this is what keeps me going, is God is giving you this opportunity. He's giving you this blessing, prophecies coming true before our eyes, the reflourishing of the land, in gathering of the exiles. And you're not going to be part of it. You don't want to be part of it. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it's being away from family and what you're used to and having to watch NFL games at 2 o'clock in the morning instead of at a normal hour. It's difficult. But I want to be part of the destiny of the Jewish people. I want to be part of God's blessing. I want to be able to look at God when I daven every day and say, you're giving me blessing and I'm taking advantage of it. I want to be part of it. I want to be part of the future history of the Jewish people and not be part of people who sort of sat back on the sidelines and watched it happening. So that's what keeps me here. That's what keeps me going. That's what we've conveyed to our children as well. And they will convey to their children. And that's what my children now try to convey to their cousins overseas and to their friends overseas, because this is where Jewish history is going. And we have to not take it for granted what God is giving us in our time and stand up and be counted. And that's what keeps me going. And that's what should hopefully inspire and motivate people, at the very least, explore Aliyah. It doesn't work out, like I said before, then raise your children to make Aliyah, at the very least to say, I want to be part of it. Keep it on the radar screen. And if it does work out and you're blessed, then you've stood up and you're part of the future of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel.
Amazing. Amen. 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 Rabbi Dov, thank you so much for your incredible and inspiring words. It's so important for people to hear them. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, talking Aliyah, and continued incredible hatzlacha in the future with all the incredible and important work that you're doing. Thank you so much.